So yes, this session is going to be about estimation, but not the one that you probably think of. So let me start with a story. Let's take a generic company from our industry. And now we have different tribes, right? We have the magicians, the illusionists, salespeople, right? And then we have also the park rangers, the project managers, right? To keep the animals in the forest. We also have the cool guys, team leaders. Last but not least, we have developers. So the only ones who actually do some work. And designers, of course, and testers, and UX designers too. And then obviously, we also do have customers. So a customer comes in and hands in the holy grail of specification. By the way, customers, they're from a different fairy tale. So what happens now is that the sales guys would pass it down to the project managers, who passes it down to a team leader. In the end, it's in developers' hands, and the developer will now spend like 3 hours or 3 days or 3 weeks crunching this thing and coming up with a number, an estimate. "12 weeks. Guys, it's going to take 12 weeks to do this thing." So now, a team leader, he's a cool guy. He likes his developers, right? He doesn't want them to get fired. So he will just add another week on top of that, just in case, you know? And pass it up to the project manager. And she is an experienced one. She has never yet seen a project that would be delivered on time. So she will make it 15, right? By the time this thing reaches the customer, the sales team goes ballistic. "Guys, 15 weeks? No one is paying for that. Does it really have to take so long?" So now the sales team with their park rangers will install fear and pressure on the development team to come up with a better number. So the developer will again spend 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months estimating this stuff and come back with a better number. Guys, like 10 weeks is the absolute minimum I need for this thing, and it's risky as hell already. "Well, okay, don't worry. We're just gonna take this 10 weeks and we're gonna remove all the unnecessary stuff, like automated testing, or like code quality checks, because who needs that anyway, right?" So in the very end, the number will be 8. Well, the customer will be happy. This guy, though, not so much, because this will be his commitment now. And funny thing about those numbers, once they're within the team, they are called estimates. Once they leave the team, they are called deadlines. Does it sound familiar to you? I'm happy for you then. I'm happy. Well, it may actually, right? Because this is still a thing that is happening in our organizations out there. So why don't we finally face it, right? Why don't we act from our adult state for once? Why don't we face it? We suck at estimating. So let me introduce myself. This is me. My name is Tomek. I'm a software developer, and I suck at estimating. Well, luckily, I don't have to do it anymore, because the company I work for has a different approach to estimates. And during this session, I will tell you all about it. So what we do is we do statistical forecasting, which changes the whole landscape for us. A quick agenda for you guys. First, we're going to go through like why we even do it, what are some psychological phenomena behind the problems with estimation. Then I'm going to tell you exactly how we do it. So we're going to go through some heavy math stuff like Monte Carlo simulations and statistical distributions, after which you're going to be like, what is this guy talking about? And then I'm going to show you some real data and tell you that it not always works as we would like it to. So without further ado, let's begin with this thing, and we're going to begin with the same very story. Because while this story showed a lot of dysfunctions in our teams, it also very neatly pinpoints what is at the core of most of the estimation efforts that we are using today. Because when we remove all the politics and all the number crunching, what we are left with is an expert guess. An expert guess is exactly what it says it is. It's a guess, supposedly informed, supposedly done by someone who is skilled and experienced and has knowledge, and supposedly knows how long things will gonna take in the future. Which sounds kind of absurd when I put it like this, right? And it is because expert guessing does not work. And that's because of uncertainty. We operate in domains of huge uncertainty. As Tom DeMarco and Timothy Lister put it, if a project has no risks, don't do it, because you have already done it. Same team, same scope, same customer, same technology, same weather. If it's all the same, no uncertainty, it's already done. It's already done. And whenever I bring this argument to the customers that we are very uncertain about those estimates, customers or teams, software developers would very often come up with an argument, well, let's address that. Let's do something about it, right? So how do we do it? Well, let's add more data. Let's refine our specification. Our requirements. Let's provide more information. Well, the thing is that as research shows, while you provide more and more info to your estimators, they don't get better at estimating. At some point, they may actually start getting worse because of an information overload effect. So quality of estimates does not improve, does not increase. What does increase, however, consistently is the confidence level of the estimators. So in other words, you will get super confident experts, borderline cocky, while at the same time the quality of estimates will not improve or even may get worse. So another argument that I frequently hear, well, let's get better experts. Come on, there has to be someone who knows better, right? Has more experience, more knowledge, more skill. Well, that approach does not work either, because as Dan Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner, researcher and scientist, has proven, he coined a term called planning fallacy, which is a psychological phenomenon that says that we as humans, we inherently have a tendency to underestimate time needed to complete the task, despite our previous experience of failures to live up to the schedule. We are bad at estimating. But I told you this already, right? Not only as organizations, but just as human beings, right? And this thing applies to engineers as well. But of course, we wouldn't just leave it like this, right? We will come up with all sorts of tools and methods and techniques to improve our estimation skills. One of those would be sizing, any kind of sizing, activities, story points, t-shirt sizing, whatnot. So the problem with story points is that it's a waste of time. And this slide is originally, this slide is done by my friend with whom I've been doing this speech together like last year. And at this slide, he would literally say that story points belong in hell, hence the flames. And I'm not so opinionated. I like numbers. I don't want any number to spend, any time in hell. But I do agree with this. And I'm going to wear my project manager hat. So let me tell you why. So the general notion behind the story points, like the rationale, is that people are fairly good at saying that this is bigger than this, even if we cannot exactly say that this is 5 and this is 2, right? But we are good at seeing that things are different. So we would come up with this artificial metric of points. And let me tell you why it doesn't work. So first, we need to get some concepts right. So lead time. Lead time is a very simple measure of time that elapses from the beginning of the task, when we start working, to when we are done, or done, or done, as in some organizations. And the thing with lead time is that it's not equal to work time. This is a very simple workflow, but you can see that there are some handoff stages, right? There's time that tasks are just waiting and not being actively worked on, like development done, waiting for testing, testing done, waiting for approval, approval done, waiting for done, and so on, so on. And this is even worse than that, because even if a task is an ongoing, in progress, it's not being worked all the time, because the developers would naturally take a break to fix an urgent critical bug on a production system, or attend a planning meeting, or a retrospective. So there is a lot of wait time, which brings me to another concept, flow efficiency, which is a simple ratio of those two. So work time divided by lead time. Now looking at this, would you say this flow efficiency is good? It's about 20%. Is it good in your opinion? Good. It's very good. It's very good. In our industry, the flow efficiency of 10% is considered normal, and 5% is not unusual. But how does it relate to story points, right? Well, the thing is that when we estimate and we attach our story points, planning, poker, whatever, we only think about this part, right? So what happens when we double the size of it? It affects the lead time marginally. And lead time is an important metric, critical, I would say, because it reflects our ability to deliver value to our customer, right? So size doesn't matter. And this is proven by research. Larry Maccheroni would analyze data from more than 10,000 agile teams looking for patterns in the data. He was looking for the best metric to assess teams' productivity. And what he would come up with is this: just simply counting the number of items is enough. So counting the number of items, so throughput, right? Not velocity, but throughput. This is enough to count them. Another confirmation comes from Steve Rogalski. He would analyze more than a year of a project for a team of 15, and he would track velocity, the red one, and the burn up in throughput, right? I don't see any difference after a year. So story points and any other sizing activity is usually a waste of time. If there is any value, if sizing, it's when the task is either too big and we have to split it, or when we have no freaking clue. And this is a rationale behind those cards that we are selling, and you can get them today for free. I have sets. I will put them in the hats in the corridors after the talk. So please come by, say hi, give me feedback, and then you can have those cards, or just take them. So either too big or we have no clue, everything else is one. One story point, one requirement, one work item, what have you. Bottom line of all this is that expert guess is not working as we would like it to, because we just plan things and the universe plans just don't match up with this stuff, right? So what are the alternatives? Well, one of them is statistical forecasting, which we have been playing with and experimenting for the last 2 years in Lunar. And I want to tell you how we do it and how you can also do it. So there is this, oh, by the way, statistical forecasting is just a fancy name, but what it really means is predicting the future from historical data. That's it. So there's a thing on this conference that people will put themselves next to some famous people on the slides, like Jamie used the Tesla guy and the Apple guy, right? And then Nina would use Eric Berne. So I also have my guys. This is Troy McGuinness and Larry Maccheroni, and these are the guys who invented this whole statistical forecasting thing, or maybe not invented, but they have been doing tremendous work for the last couple of years in our agile communities to promote this thing. And if you really want to like dig in deep into this stuff, go to focusobjective.com, and there's lots of tools, there's lots of research, very interesting. So these guys are a real deal. I'm just a guy in a hat. Based on their work, we have built a tool called Projector, and I want to tell you how this thing works. Before that, though, we have to get some math right, so we are on the same page. So how many of you knows what Monte Carlo simulation is? Okay, some hands. Well, let me quickly explain you how we can use Monte Carlo in the context of a software project. So this is our project. We're going to be using this example for the rest of this talk. We are 5 weeks into it, 5 iterations. We're measuring the burn-up. Burn-up is measured in throughput values because story points are in hell. And we have the scope line, and the client wants to know how long it's going to take us to finish this thing. So one thing that we can do, we can just draw a trend line, like an average, and it's like 6. But this is like 50%. Doesn't really give us anything, right? But we can do better. We can actually look at our historical data, so our throughput values, 2, 5, 2, 8, and 4, and use this to simulate possible future scenarios. We're going to put them on a pie chart like this, which has a fancy name too. It's called statistical distribution. And we are going to use this pie chart as like, you can think of this as like a 5-sided dice that we roll. And we're going to spin this thing for for the number of times that is needed to hit the scope line, right? So now we are getting really unlucky because we are getting all the 2s. But we can like be super unlucky and just get all the 2s, right? So this means the project will end in 12 weeks. By the same token, we can get very lucky and finish in 3. And this gives us a range of possibilities. Obviously, these are just like extremes, right? And then when we run this thing for hundreds of times, each time we're going to get a different combination of those numbers, and they will start to accumulate. And some of them are more likely to happen, some of them less. And this thing that we have on top is another statistical distribution. It's called a histogram, and it's going to be very important. And I'm going to be briefly, very quickly, we're going to go back to that. So it's like rolling 2 dice, 2 6-sided dice, right? When you roll them enough times, you're very unlikely to have a 12 and very unlikely to have a 2, but you are very likely to have a 7 because you have many combinations, right? 1 and 5, 1 and 6, 5 and 2, 3 and 4. So this is how Monte Carlo simulation works. Really, it's really that simple. So now, back to Projector. Let me tell you how we employ this technique into our tool. So first things first, we need historical data. And historical data that we're going to use is only this. This is a list of tasks that we already finished, 21 tasks, start and end date. As simple as it looks to you, this is exactly all we need. So when we put this data on a timeline, we can derive two things from that. First is lead time. Why are we using lead times? Because lead times are good, because they contain all sorts of stuff that happens throughout our projects. So these are our lead times for this historical data, and then we can arrange them and count them up and come up with a statistical distribution of lead time values, which was input number 1 to our statistical model. Now, we're going to work on input number 2. Back to our timeline, we can see the purple numbers on the bottom. There are work in progress values, right? So on this day, the team was working on 2 tasks. On this day, on 4. And then, again, we're going to get those numbers that put them on a statistical distribution. So these are our 2 inputs. The last thing we need is the number of outstanding tasks in our backlog. 24 to go. So let me tell you now how a single run of simulation is performed. So first thing we do, we take our lead time distribution, and we spin this thing 24 times, because we have 24 tasks, right? And we get random numbers, well, randomly chosen from the statistical distribution. And then what we could do now is just we could try to squeeze them on the timeline and see like, okay, we need 22 days. But this is not true. and this is not a part of simulation, this is just for an example. Because we don't work on 4 tasks every day, right? We actually had a different distribution of work in progress. So instead of doing this, we're going to just like merge all those lead times together and calculate the sum of units of work. And now we're going to use our work in progress distribution to simulate day by day of the new the remaining time of the project. And for each day, we're going to like deplete this pool of units of work, right? So on the first day, we have a work in progress value of 2. On the second day, we have a work in progress value of 3, and so on and so forth, until we get to the end of this whole pool of units of work, which happens on day 29. So it will take us 29 days to complete the project. Well, not really, because this is just one possible future scenario, right? So we're going to run this thing again and again and again, and those values will start to accumulate, and they will start to form a histogram. So on horizontal axis, we have work days. So we can see that the range of possibilities is from 17 to 39 days. But those values are very unlikely, right? Because they are like the tail of this thing. And on the vertical axis, we have the frequency. We have the number of times that those days appeared in our simulations, right? So like the highest one is what, 28.9, which appeared like almost 1,500 times. But this is not so important, actually. What we can get from this data is that we can look where is the point where 50% of our simulations ended at. And this would be 28. And we can give this number to our client, saying, man, we can finish this thing in 28 days. But we are like 50% sure about this, right? Our confidence level is 50%. And the customer will say, well, it's kind of like not really good confidence. Can you give me something more? Yes, we can. We can give you 90%. So like we're 90% sure we're going to finish in 31 days. Well, that's better. That's better. Obviously, we're not showing this thing to our customer. We are showing him a nice graph with nice deadlines or estimates, sorry. Well, we have to change this graph, Kosia. Come on. So another thing that can happen is that customer will come up with, well, guys, 90% is not enough for me. I'm very risk averse. I don't want 90%. I want better. Well, here we go. 99%, 39 days. Is this within your budget? Can you afford 39 days? Well, not really. Well, then we have to do something about it. And this is the magic of this thing, that suddenly it changes the whole frame of conversation, because we are not talking about some artificial deadlines. We are talking about probabilities and risk and what can we do with the scope. How can we fit your budget into our possibilities, right? This is the biggest win of this thing, that the conversation with customers is just completely different. And you don't have to know all this stuff. All you have to know is this address. Because you can go there and you can put in some historical data. Are you guys seeing this? Yeah. So those 24 tasks, those 21 tasks that we were using, and you put 24 here, and you hit estimate. And boom, you have all this. And it's free. You can use it. Okay, back to the thing. I'm sorry? But it's about the value, right? It's about the value. So this was the theory. Now let me give you some practical. So I have like 5 minutes and I have like 50 slides to go, so let's race. Some practical side of this thing. So basically we have 2 cases. One is like ongoing project, which is fairly easy because we have historical data and it's more or less accurate. The more tricky one is when you have a new project. The customer comes in for a quote and like we obviously don't have any historical data. So in this case, what we're going to do is we will look at the past projects from Lunar, from like our history, and we're going to choose the ones that are most similar. And by similar, I mean two things. One is team setup, and the second is features granularity. So if the new project is like, we have like 10 epics, we obviously cannot use a project that was measured in more fine-grained user stories, right? Once we get those two things more or less similar, we can feed the forecasting machine with the data from those projects and get our statistical distribution. Or actually, statistical distributions, because we will do this for few projects. And then we'll take the most optimistic end of scale from the slowest one and the most pessimistic end of scale from the fastest one and the most pessimistic end of scale from the slowest one. And this will be a broader range, obviously, right? And some customers are put off by this range, by the like, width of this range. But once we start going with the thing and we have some, like, we are like 2 weeks into the project, we can switch to using the actual data from the very same project. And when I say 90% confidence interval, when I say pessimistic end of scale, what I really mean is like 90% confidence interval, which means that we, as a company who runs those forecasts over and over again, we should be getting correct answers 9 out of 10 times. Well, in our case, it's more like 3 out of 4. So our 90% confidence is like 75, really. But we're fine with this, by the way. And the reason for this is uncertainty. And we've been talking about this already. And there are lots of sources of uncertainty that will affect your projects in a different way. Scope. Scope always changes, right? We can run our statistical machine with 40 tasks, but the project will end up doing 35 or 45, right? So this will be not accurate. System stability. How big is your team? How well it responds to change? In a 2-person project, if one of the developers gets sick for 3 weeks, that's going to hit our throughput values heavily, right? In a bigger team, not so much. And then finally, the most important one, collaboration quality. How tight are your feedback loops? How responsive is your customer? This thing can affect project's cost and time by a factor of 2. This is how bad it can get. So let me show you some real data now. This is data from our real project. This will be all burn-up charts, by the way. The blue ones are the actual real data, and then the diagonals are our forecasts. Optimistic, which is 1% chance. Pessimistic, which in this case would be 99%, and most likely, which is 50%. So this project, we started kind of slow, right? That's because we had this like intern guy turning into junior developer, and he needed some time to get up to speed with a new technology. So when we ran our forecasts, they were pretty far off, right? In reality, the project went like this. So we were overly pessimistic. What happened though is once the guy, and he's a smart one, got his shit together, he would just start delivering like crazy, right? And when in the same project we would run the forecast again after some time, this time we would get a bit too optimistic actually, right? And that's because the ending of the project was a bit slower than we expected. But it was compensated by the very beginning of the project, which was also slow. Another project, different story. Stable team, 2 really good developers. The guys that like know each other, they've worked with them, they worked together before. The customer was one of those serial entrepreneurs who a bit know what he wants than other customers. And then, not surprisingly, we would be really fast in the beginning, right? And then we would run a forecast. And this would happen. We were like totally off, totally wrong. What happened though is at this point, somewhere here, one of those guys would get some serious personal problems, and he would like basically not work for 3 weeks without telling us. He was just like, coming to work but not really working. And the other guy couldn't possibly sustain this crazy pace, right? And this thing cannot be predicted by our forecasting machine, right? But neither it can be predicted by humans. So of course, after some time, we would run forecasts again. This time, we would have the slow period of data in the data samples, and the forecast would be spot on. Okay, a few more maybe minutes. Another thing that I want to show you here is that we can choose how much data we want to use to run our forecasts. So for example, this one is run, we take all the historical data samples, while in this one, we take just last 30 tasks. And the forecast is much less accurate. That's because if you feed your machine with, if you feed the statistical machine with low quality historical data, you're going to get low quality output. So the bottom line that I want to point out to you guys here is that this thing is not perfect. It makes mistakes, but we don't aim for perfect. Because if you are considering an estimation technique, it's either have to be better or at least cheaper than the one that you are currently using. And as a matter of fact, Projector is both. And additional benefit from this is that these guys are happy because they don't have to estimate. They can just focus on delivering value to the customers. And with this, I invite you to try this thing, reach out to us, me or Lunar Logic, send an email, and let's do some forecasting together. Thank you very much.